Hi everyone, my name is Maddie and welcome back to my channel. So today I'm doing a pretty basic middle of the year video, which is the mid-year book Freakout tag. And I have done this before. I did it 2 years ago when I first had this channel, and I think I've even done it in a blog post before. But yeah, I'm doing it today. I will link the original, though I don't think it's still live, but I'll try and give credit where I can. I know it's called the Freakout tag, but honestly, I'm not freaking out too much this year. My goal for how many books I wanted to read this year, I actually set a bit lower than normal. I set it at 72. Last year I read over 100, but I set it a little bit lower simply because I was planning to read a lot more adult books and I thought they may take me longer. Plus, I was finishing my degree. I did not think I'd have much time to read. But I've already read 50 books, so I'm actually on track to read over 100 again, if I can keep reading. So I'm not really freaking out at all. I'm reading books I enjoy, I'm reading as much as I would like, so we're just gonna sort of chat about what goods and bads we've had so far this year, and so I guess we'll just get straight into the tag. So the first question is your favourite book you've read in 2020 so far, and for me this is actually a really easy question to answer because I've had an absolute standout favourite, which is Docile by K.M. Sparer. I adore this book so much and there's absolutely no question that this will be on my best books of 2020 list, and it could even top it unless something pretty spectacular comes along. For a very quick synopsis, this follows Elisha and Alex, and it's a dystopian speculative future world where to pay off family's debt you can basically sell yourself to a richer person as what is called a docile, and it's basically a form of a servant or a slave depending on how awful it is, and you get some form of choice about who you're going to be a docile to, but quite a lot of the dociles are basically used as sex slaves. When you become a docile, you are offered this drug called dosaline, which means basically you are completely zombie, you do not remember any of it, which a lot of people choose to do. But Elisha, when he goes to be a docile, is adamant he is not going to take dosaline, and so you are watching him and he is experiencing everything that's happening to him. So obviously it's really quite dark, there is a huge discussion of power dynamics, and the little tagline is "there's no consent under capitalism," and it just sums it up perfectly. It's this idea of, are you doing something willingly because you're choosing to sell yourself, or is it actually not your choice at all and it's all completely non-consensual? So it's male-male romance in inverted commas. There is a male-male relationship, whether you want to call it romance is sort of questionable, but it is handled beautifully. It's written in such a fascinating way. It's dual perspective between Alex and Elisha. It's so interesting. It's just all the issues are discussed in so much detail and handled so amazingly. I would suggest looking it up in detail before picking it up because it deals with, as I've mentioned, a lot of very difficult things. But it is definitely worth a read, and I would highly recommend it if you think it's a book that would suit you and that you would enjoy and cope quite well with reading. So the second question is the best sequel you've read so far in 2020, and for someone who normally reads a lot of series, I actually really struggled to find many sequels that I had read this year, but I do have two very quick answers, which firstly is Come Tumbling Down by Sean Maguire. This is the 5th instalment of the Wayward Children series. I love this series, I really enjoyed every single book, but this one was probably one of my favourites as it follows Jack and Jill, who are two characters which feature especially in the second book, and I think are probably my favourite duo, and I really enjoy following them, so therefore I really enjoyed this one. And there's just so much going on in this series and it is really, really brilliant. But the second one I wanted to shout out is early this year I actually read the whole A Darker Shade of Magic trilogy by V.E. Schwab, and I particularly loved the second book, A Gathering of Shadows. I really, really enjoyed this. I think my favourite part of it, not to spoil it, though I think most people have read it, is there are two characters, I won't mention which, not to spoil it, who meet in the first book and basically separate at the end of the book. And it takes about 3/4 of this book for them to meet again. And I thought that would be annoying, but honestly, it's written so well and the tension that it builds is done so effectively. And I just found myself just so engrossed wanting to see these two characters come back together. And so I really, really loved this one as well. So my battery died, but we're back now, so sorry if the angle's changed a little bit. But question 3 is a new release you haven't read yet, but you really want to. This is difficult. There's so many books I want to get to. I'm just looking across to sort of my book cart, which has normally the most recent releases. For this, I'm gonna go with Beach Read by Emily Henry. This is a fun sort of summery romance. It's actually the next book on my TBR, so I should be reading it in the next couple of days. but it sounds so much fun. It's about these two authors who are both suffering from writer's block and so set themselves the challenge of writing in each other's styles and genres and seeing basically who can get published first. And it sounds like so much fun because it's kind of rivals, but then it ends up as lovers, and it's about writing and books, and I just think it's going to be a really fun read, so I'm super excited to pick this up. So question 4 is an anticipated release for the second half of the year, and I cannot wait to read Cemetery Boys by Aidan Thomas. This just sounds like honestly the perfect book. It follows a trans boy who is trying to prove his gender to his family, who are not particularly accepting, and so to prove himself a brujo, he tries to summon a ghost and succeeds, but then the ghost will not leave. And the ghost he has summoned is the school's sort of bad boy, and in the process of trying to get him to leave, they kind of end up falling in love, I think. So paranormal YA romance, but with LGBT rep, and it just sounds brilliant. It's a debut, so I'm super excited to pick it up, and I will be buying it as soon as it comes out, I am sure. Question 5 is your biggest disappointment so far, and for me, this is Severance by Ling Ma. I was so excited to read this. I bought a really nice edition. I was super excited about it. It's about sort of pandemic, so it was surprisingly fitting for this year, but I just didn't like it at all. It was confusing. I didn't really understand what was going on, and as someone who reads a lot of fantasy, I'm good with time jumps and backstory and all of this, but I just couldn't follow it that much. And also the first half of the book kind of follows one plot, then you jump to somewhere completely different, and then you kind of come back. And I won't spoil it, but it goes from surviving this pandemic and everyone coming together, and also the negative side of how people act, and suddenly turns into people being horrible. And it just didn't feel realistic. It felt like they were trying to create drama, create a thrilling aspect of the book to make it interesting. Whereas if it was more like Station 11, that really slow pace, just a picture of what could happen, I think I would have preferred it. So yeah, this was really disappointing. I think I gave it 2 stars. It wasn't like awful, so it wasn't a 1 star, but it was definitely not what I was hoping from this book at all. So question 6 is your biggest surprise so far this year, and for me, this was Mr. Penumbra's 24-Hour Bookstore by Robin Sloan. I knew this was big on BookTube, but it was kind of before I got here, before I started watching, but I'd heard that it was sort of, you know, BookTube's favourite. And I always had a vague interest in it, but for some reason it didn't particularly appeal. And then one day I didn't know what to read at all, so I sort of just picked 3 random books on my shelf and read the first few pages of each and saw what appealed to me, and this did, so I decided to keep reading. And it's ended up being one of my favourite books of the year. It was brilliant. I mean, if you know anything about what I like to read, I always mention books within books and sort of mystery things like that. That's exactly this. It's a person trying to decode a really weird, mysterious book, and it's brilliant. What I love as well is that it follows a graphic designer, but one of the other main characters is a software engineer and in computing, so it's nice seeing both sides of that, especially as someone who enjoys doing both. It's always nice seeing both of that. And it's fascinating, and its writing is so beautiful, and I'm actually really intrigued to reread this one day. But yeah, this surprised me. I thought it might be like a good book I'd quite enjoy. Didn't expect it to stand out as a favourite, but it absolutely did. So question 7 is your favourite new author, and that's either a debut author or someone who's new to you. And I've actually not got that many standouts this year. A lot of the books I've read have been by authors who I've read from before, so I already knew I enjoyed. So I think I'm gonna have to go with K.M. Sparrow, who wrote Docile, which I mentioned as my favourite book so far this year. It was such an interesting concept, and as I said, the writing was stunning, and he's announced his second book, which also sounds weird and fascinating, and he gave this list on Twitter of sort of things that would never be in the official bio for it because they're a bit out there, but how he would describe it, it sounds chaotic and amazing, and I'm so here for it and excited to pick it up. So yeah, I would definitely say he's my new favourite, and I'm very excited to see and read what he writes in future. Question 8 is your newest fictional crush, and if I'm honest, I don't really tend to have fictional crushes. It's not something I really do. I used to when I was a lot younger, but not really anymore. So I'm gonna go with the main character of The Infinite Noise by Lawrence Shippen, Caleb, because I kind of just want to wrap him up in cotton wool. He is such a sweet character who means so well but is struggling with so much. In this book, he has powers. He's what's called an atypical, and his power is basically empathy. He can feel what other people are feeling really, really strongly, and it affects him a lot. But it makes him a really sweet person, and he's trying so hard to do everything he can for this other guy, Adam, and they actually end up together. and he's just really trying to make Adam's life better by using his power, and even when that hurts him, he'll still do it. And it's so adorable, and Caleb deserves all the love. So I'm gonna call him my fictional crush, but basically it's just someone I want to wrap up in cotton wool and be happy forever. Question 9 is your newest favourite character, and I'm kind of gonna go with a bit of like an ensemble cast because all of the characters in this book are amazing. This is The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. It's a new book this year, and it's a brilliant book. I loved it. I gave it sort of 4.55 stars. But it involves a magical orphanage, and all the kids at the orphanage just win as the best characters. They're written so well, they're so interesting, they're so cute and funny, and I'm kind of obsessed with them. So yeah, I would go with all of them, especially Theodore. If you've read this and you know who Theodore is, top character. I love him, he's so cute. Question 10 is a book that made you cry, and I very, very rarely cry at books. I think the only thing that's very slightly made me tear up this year was the end of Mr. Penumbra's, but that's simply because it made me so happy because I loved it. So what I'm actually going to go with for this is My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. I adored this book, but it deals with such a harrowing topic that even though I don't think it actually made me cry, it was that sort of utter feeling of dread and sadness whilst reading it. And also it's just brilliant. It's so brilliantly written. It's following a girl or a woman who is sort of looking back on when she was 15 and had a relationship with her much, much older teacher. At the time, she thought it was consensual, and even when you're following her when she was older, she was like, no, I chose that, it was fine. And it's her sort of coming to terms with maybe it wasn't what she thought it was, and maybe she needs to reassess what happened, and her dealing with all of that. Brilliant book, highly recommend. And yeah, even if it didn't necessarily make me physically cry, it made me just feel so sad and upset for her that I think it's a sensible option for this prompt. So question 11 is a book that made you happy, and for this I'm going to go with Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief. I'm currently rereading the Percy Jackson series. I've only got one book left now, and it's just so nostalgic. So reading it is making me so happy. Like, I laughed out loud reading this so many times. It's so funny, but also even funnier because I remember the first time I read it and how I felt then. So yeah, this is definitely making me very happy, and I made a very good decision deciding to pick this series up again. So question 12 is the most beautiful book you've either bought or received so far this year, and I've actually not got that many books at all. I've been really trying to make sure I'm buying significantly less than I'm reading because my owned TBR is insanely huge. That's something to freak out about, if anything. And so I'm trying to kind of slightly cut it down, especially as I'll be moving within the next year, and so taking all of this with me may not be very easy. So I'm trying to get through a lot of the books I already own. But one book I did buy and I haven't read yet somehow is Steel Crow Saga by Paul Kruger. And I think this cover is just stunning. You can see the shine there of all the foiling. I think this is stunning. It's just this gorgeous sort of line art design, and I love it. And I'm so excited to pick this up and see exactly how the cover ties in with the story itself. The final question, question 13, is what books do you need to read by the end of the year? And I have so many I want to get to, so I'm going to go and get a little stack and then come back and quickly run you through the ones I really want to get to. So I've got 3 really quite different books here. Obviously there's so many more than this that I want to get to, but I just thought I'd pick out 3 which are ones that are really high on my list. So the first is A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara, and I really want to get to this. I set myself the challenge at the beginning of the year of like 8 different books, none of which I have read so far, but this is the top one of them, of like a really challenging book for me to get through. I'm sure this isn't that challenging, it's just long. I read a lot of long books because I read fantasy, but for some reason a long adult contemporary to me is hugely intimidating. So I really want to get to this. It gets such amazing reviews and I'm just so intrigued to know what it's about. So next, in a very different vein, is Not Your Villain by C.B. Lee. This is the sequel to a book I read last year, which was Not Your Sidekick by C.B. Lee. And it's a series of companion novels, so they do very much go together, they do follow on from each other, but each book follows a different main character from sort of the main friendship group you meet in the first book. And it's about this place, a sort of futuristic world, where some people have superpowers, but you are put into a classification, and depending on your classification, you might just sort of be able to live your life, or you might have to sort of work for the government and be trained by them. And the first one follows someone who is involved with this world but isn't a superhero themselves. And then this follows one of the friends who actually is, and it's queer. You have different queer rep in every book, and it's just a really interesting series. And I loved the first one, so I can't believe I haven't picked this one up yet. So the third book I really want to get to this year is the Mistborn series by Brandon Sanderson. This is the first book, The Final Empire. I have heard such good things about Brandon Sanderson. I've read the first 2 books in the Skyward series and I'm waiting for the rest. I read Elantris earlier this year and really enjoyed it, but everyone always raves about his Cosmere books and Mistborn, so I'm determined to pick this up. Again, it's just intimidating. This doesn't look that chunky, but there are a lot of pages in here, and something about it, I know when I read Elantris I found it not slow as in the plot, but slow to read. It took me longer to read than I anticipated. So this series kind of scares me, but everyone loves it and I'm sure I will too, so I'm really determined to try and pick this series up by the end of the year. If I haven't, someone call me out, because I've been saying I'm going to pick this up for almost 3 years now and I still haven't. So that's about it for the mid-year freakout tag. As I said at the beginning, I'm not freaking out too much, I'm pretty happy. There are definitely some books that I haven't got to yet that I would have liked to, but I've still got just over 6 months, so I'm not too stressed, and I've also finished uni, so I've got quite a lot of time in these 6 months, though BookTube is taking up a lot of my life at the moment whilst I learn how to film and edit. But I think I can fit them in, so I'm not too stressed, I'm not too worried. I'm just enjoying my reading and planning to carry on as is and read as much as I can and hopefully love a lot of the books. But that is it for today, so thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you want to see more content from me. Also in my description will be all of the books I mentioned, as well as all my other socials like Instagram and Twitter, so please go and check me out over there if you want to connect somewhere else. And that's it, so thank you so much for watching. Bye, and I'll see you in the next one.